Hey folks, offensive security team at Secure IT 360 here to talk briefly about a new vulnerability that I am almost certain you have already heard of in some capacity, and that is the new Microsoft Diagnostics RCE vulnerability. And it's even got a fun name. What was the name again, Spencer?
Follina.
Follina, which apparently is the zip code of somewhere in Italy. Or the phone number prefix or whatever it is. So anyway, long story short, Spencer's here to tell us more about it. We also have Jarius with us as well to talk about some certain aspects of it from a defensive perspective as well. So Spencer, take it away.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Looking forward to talking with you guys for a few minutes about this. So yeah, over the weekend, there was some research done, and essentially there's a 0-day code execution vulnerability in Microsoft Office that specifically targets the Microsoft Diagnostics tool. It has a CVE. It's CVE 2022-30190 for those that follow that kind of thing. There has been some exploitation of this in the wild. However, it's been predominantly focused on organizations in Russia and India. I believe Proofpoint had some research today that indicated that there was a Chinese APT using it for Chinese targets of interest. Outside of that, however, we've seen limited exploitation, outside of security researchers and things like that. There are other Microsoft applications that have URI protocols built into them that could also be utilized to exploit this technique. So definitely something that we're keeping an eye on. There are various POCs by security researchers out there, and as we seek to reproduce, analyze, and understand this exploit, we can expect to see more research, more POCs, and likely down the road some actual activity in terms of criminal gangs, threat actors exploiting this. And just to give a little bit of background, the first malicious sample was identified back on May 27th, and exploitation of this has been traced back to about April 21st. And earlier in April, there was actually a researcher who identified this and sent this to Microsoft. And essentially, Microsoft said that they couldn't get this exploit to work, or there was no password for the file that was submitted, and essentially they dismissed it.
So apparently there is a minimum string length required for the exploit to fire. And that was unclear to the Microsoft representative who, it's still not super clear on why they couldn't get it to fire, but we suspect that might be why.
Yeah. And just going back further, there was research back in 2020, I believe, that showed specific attacks towards Electron applications. So that research had a number of Microsoft protocols and URIs referenced, and this was one of the protocols mentioned was the Microsoft Diagnostics tool. So that research was back in 2020. Now fast forward to today, we have a 0-day in Office that affects pretty much all versions of Office, excluding a handful. For example, I wasn't able to get the POC to work on Office 365 Apps for Business, the latest release. However, executing it with PowerShell's wget, which was just kind of researched earlier today, does exploit the vulnerability. So there's some caveats with this and some things to consider. But in terms of scope, it does seem to affect a wide range of Microsoft Office products from 2013 all the way up to 2021, Office Pro Plus, Office 365. So quite a wide scope, especially when you consider there's other URI schemas that could potentially be used as an attack vector. So a fairly wide berth here on exploitation.
And I think at its root, right, the way this thing works is there's an XML component to these Office files, right? So effectively, for those of you that don't know, an Office file is basically a container. And in that container are multiple files, one of which is a file that defines external references or different schema components. And basically, you can call, in some cases, external resources by a file path. Certain resources, based on our understanding, are trusted. this may be being one of them. And so, anytime it's a container file like a PDF or doc or whatever, the opportunity exists to leverage these file path resources.
Yep.
And so I think at a fundamental level, that's what this is. It's another external resource attack from within a file container.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the mitigation for this, or the mitigations for this, the best is obviously going to be a patch whenever Microsoft is able to develop one. However, like we said, there's a number of different components involved with this. The attack landscape for this, or the footprint for this, has the potential to be fairly large.
Right.
But to address the specific issue here and the specific exploit here of Office applications and child processes, there's a number of things we can do. One of those is an ASLR rule. So we can block Office applications from creating child processes. It's an ASLR rule. This could break, legitimate applications. Some applications might do this legitimately. So something to test and roll out slowly. But that's one mitigation, that can help, defend against this.
I think it breaks Grammarly, by the way, which I am a proud user of. And so Alabama education, but yeah, so it does break Grammarly if you use the first ASLR rule.
Yeah, and all the ASLR rules you can roll out with Windows 10. There's some added features if you have like E5. There's some added intelligence and analytics features with Defender for Endpoint and things like that if you have the E5 license. But you still can roll out that rule, and that can be helpful. The other mitigation, which is, I guess, Microsoft's recommended mitigation, or one of them, is to unregister the Microsoft support or Microsoft diagnostic schema, the MSDT schema. So this disables the actual MSDT protocol. This may or may not be a long-term solution. I guess it kind of depends if you're using the diagnostic tool in your environment, right? So if this is something you can safely just block outright, it's not a bad idea, not a bad option if you're not using this utility.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that the uses of MSDT are limited. Even in large enterprise environments, I cannot imagine there is a frequent requirement for the Microsoft Diagnostics tool. So,
yeah,
what do you think, Darius?
Well, I agree, and I think largely, part of that is because most of the time when you run the diagnostics tool, it doesn't give you a solution. So
completely agree
with especially with Windows.
Yes.
So I imagine in most environments, it's not going to be used that much. It's something that if you can just, outright block it, you'll probably see a very limited impact. But of course, Microsoft is recommending if you can, unregistering the schema via a registry key change. So, that's definitely an option if you have to have it. But I mean, I would say outright blocking it until, all the chips fall and everyone has everything figured out. Definitely not a bad idea.
Yep.
And my understanding is, though, that the MSDT is the core of this vulnerability, right? So we were talking about the width of the footprint earlier, and that is basically everything that has the capability of calling this executable file. So by removing this from the equation, we're pretty effectively nuking this specific threat. I mean, there are many others like it, but
this variant with the Microsoft diagnostic tool, that protocol. There's other ones like the Xbox Live and the Windows Store, and there's a handful of other protocols or schemas, URI schemas, I guess you would refer to them as, that could also be abused, but those have yet to be seen, right? I think now the red teamers and the threat actors are going to be looking at this more closely because I think it reveals a fairly big unresearched or relatively unresearched area that probably has some goodies in it from a security perspective.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think one thing, I don't know if we mentioned it, I think that's pretty cool, is the fact that, if you modify the document to, RTF, at that point, you can get it to exploit, just by previewing the file. You don't even have to open it.
Yeah, can we talk about the fact that you can fire an executable binary by previewing an RTF?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know about anybody else, but that is a dramatic thing
And I
in the
don't
world that I live in.
and I don't know anybody that's actually used the preview feature. Like, do you guys use the preview feature? I don't think I've ever
Victims
used
of
it.
this attack.
Yeah, I used to preview future here and there, admittedly.
But for documents though, like maybe
Yeah.
for pictures, right? But I've never used it for documents actually. So I don't know. Maybe I'm strange. Maybe it's just a weird thing. But
Yeah, and I just think, I mean, just speaking to detection, this is going to be a difficult one to detect. Ultimately with this exploit, it's happening due to referencing an external source. So what ends up happening is it's going to be tough to detect a file because there are no macros. Macros aren't what's causing the issue here. Um, but there are a few ways to detect it. I think the biggest thing that you can do is monitor any time an Office product um, spawns an instance of the diagnostic service. That right there should at least be a red flag to at least investigate. And I imagine as time progresses, being able to detect this will improve. Um, Especially depending on what EDR service you're using. So I know there are a couple of EDR services where, I mean, they're looking at the hashes of POCs, and that's fine and that's okay. But really, you want an EDR service that's moving more towards looking at the behavior. So, like I said earlier, looking at the fact that these Office products are spawning an instance of this service. And I imagine that within these next upcoming days, you'll notice you'll have a lot of services that are ultimately implementing this into their toolkit.
Yeah, and on that note, specifically, there are it looks like some detection rules for carbon black. It looks like Kevin Beaumont. Am I saying that right, Spencer?
yeah, I think so.
Glossy the dog on GitHub has created a super simple 2-line rule to do exactly what you just said, Darius, which is
Yep.
Yeah, for a Defender for Endpoint query that you can save.
Oh, is that a DFE query? My
Yeah,
bad. I
it's a
thought
Defender.
it was okay, cool.
Yep.
Even better.
Yeah, and if you have E5, you can save it as a custom detection rule as well. If you want to let Defender to alert on you or alert you of that. So pretty cool. It'll catch, at least the rudimentary based exploitation of that we know of so far.
You can even put actions behind it too if you wanted to just terminate the process. So I mean, definitely some options there.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, and a handful of Sigma rules and Yara rules by the community. Another example of kind of the community coming together is when something like this happens, like Log4j and Spring4Shell and all that stuff. It's really cool to see the community come together, share videos and POCs and Sigma rules, and really put a lot of get a lot of information out there really quickly, as far as and wide as possibly as the community possibly can. And I think it helps with visibility because we have people ask us all the time about these things, and it helps people be more aware sooner. Even if it happens to be kind of over a holiday weekend, at least we know about these things, and we're not sideswiped by them, come Tuesday morning or something. We kind of can get some legs under us before it kind of becomes extremely widespread in the media.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, we're fortunate in this case that even though this is very serious and it's going to garner a lot of attention and already has, because it's a no touch, right? Just, previewing an RTF or opening a non-macro Word doc hits you with this. But there's a ton of great information that has come up in just 24, 48 hours. So detection opportunities exist. And by the way, I also want to take this opportunity to point out the whole blocking and tackling concept that I like to preach to everybody. And that is, this thing's spinning off a request that's going to leave your network in an unexpected way. These are documents that are going to be delivered to your employees, to your users in an unexpected way, i.e., from an email address that they're not familiar with. So there are always tons of detection and prevention things that if you're doing basic email filtering or you're doing basic sandboxing of unexpected files or non-whitelisted email addresses, just tons and tons of stuff here that will stop this before it ever reaches that point. And then there are a ton of other things you can do too, right? To react to that. But don't give up on the basics of filtering email and educating users and things of that nature. So
yeah, and once an attacker lands on an environment, they still have to do something, right? It's not the end for them. It's just the beginning. They have a goal in mind, and they will look to move laterally, elevate privileges, all of which is going to make noise, all of which presents opportunity for them to be detected. And once they're on their network, or once they're on your network, they're on your turf, right? Use canary tokens, use some of these techniques, active defense, it's commonly called, and stuff like that, cyber deception, whatever you want to call it. Use some of these things to your advantage to detect these things. So they're on your turf when they're on your network. So
agreed. Cool. So anything else, guys?
I think that's it for me. I mean, I think we covered everything that we wanted to cover. Stay safe out there.
Yeah. And we'll include some resources too, right? So we are basically giving you the research that other researchers have done, right? So we want to make sure we give credit where it's due, and we'll include links and all kinds of stuff. I know my getting into this was a John Hammond thing where I watched his YouTube video and it was fantastic. So we'll include tons of resources, and you can dive as deep as you want, or you can reach out to us directly and ask questions. We will continue to keep an eye on this as well and update it as needed. So cool. Everybody have a good one. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Darius, anything else?
Have a good one. No, good to go.